Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the Expats Portugal webinar for the 27th of March, 2025. It is smarter money transfers for expats in Portugal. Whether you're planning your move to Portugal or already live here, managing your finances wisely can make a huge difference, as we'll find out tonight. Many expats overlook currency transfers only to be hit with poor exchange rates, hidden bank fees, and unexpected delays. That one really hurts, that last one. If you're buying property, paying rent, or covering daily expenses, even small exchange rate fluctuations can cost you thousands. And for those on a pension or a fixed income, not having a strategy in place could mean your money doesn't stretch as far as it should. So you're definitely here to have questions answered about moving currency around, whether it's UK pounds or US dollars or many other currencies that Sarah will tell us about tonight. We welcome Sarah Davey from Spartan FX. How are you doing, Sarah, in Portugal?
I'm well. I was just saying I'm back in Portugal, so I'm doing well now.
Wonderful. And you've got some wonderful sort of case study illustrations for us. You've got I think you've summarized really the top tips or the big issues for people that you'll share with us tonight. However, before we go there, you have moved to Portugal yourself using many of the Expats Portugal services. And it's always nice to check in with you about your journey, your Portuguese adventure. And when we were talking before we got started tonight, you were really glad to be home, right?
Yes, I was. I went back to the UK to visit friends and family, 2.5 weeks. It felt like I was away for months. Right. And I just couldn't wait to get back home. In fact, I was watching people in the UK, I know, like Michael Portello in Portugal. I was watching those programs and they was going around to different places. I watched the one in Braga, and so it sort of made me feel homesick.
Oh, wow.
I do need to explore more of Portugal. That's the goal for 2025.
We all do. No question about that. And there's so much to do here. It's not a massive country, but there are so many experiences to have. And we're doing our little bit with that on the Expats Portugal weekends, next of which is in Coimbra on the 12th of April. And for the rest of the year, we'll be going to various places. So you'll be able to join us as we tour Portugal. Can we have an update more generally about your adventure here in Portugal? We're coming into a fantastic time of year, aren't we? I bet it's beautiful where you are in this springtime weather.
Yes, we've had a bit of mixed weather at the beginning of the year, a little bit more rain. But to be fair, as I said, comparing it to the UK where I've come from, it's still nicer weather. You know, I was there and it was 3 degrees in the UK at one point. So although we've got, a bit cooler weather or there's a bit of rain, it's still generally warmer than where I've come from. But now it's nice to see. I think the difference, as we were saying, and even if it's cool here, often you still see blue skies, and it just lifts your mood. It really makes a difference, I would say.
Yeah, agreed. And how long have you been here now?
10 months.
Really? Has that flown by?
Yeah, nearly 11 months, flown by. Really flown by.
You're right.
Having fun, that's what they say, isn't it?
Absolutely. And I think part of that is the food and the wine and the culture. Any notable experiences, Portuguese food, wine, or cultural experiences that you've got to share or report back on?
The wine's very good. I didn't really know a lot about Portuguese wine before really I moved, or until I started coming to Portugal. I don't think they export much. I'd say they keep the good stuff. Yes. So really enjoyed that. Again, that's another thing to explore a little bit more, the different regions. So usually you go to is Douro Valley, but there's so many other regions and nice wines out there. And obviously the green wine, which is funny because I thought initially when I arrived it was going to be green, green wine.
Right. Did you send it back when it arrived? No, sorry, this is far too pale.
But everybody, I said before, everybody's been really welcoming, and it makes such a difference, going around meeting other expats, meeting the experts at these events. Everybody's super friendly and really goes out the way to help you, so if you've got a question or an issue, it really makes a difference, I think, moving country.
All right, wonderful, and you're a satisfied customer of Expats Portugal and many of the professional services.
Absolutely, and we talk about using experts, which is obviously where I come in on the money side of things, but it is really important. I used the experts from the Dream Team, And I couldn't have done it without them. And I think also it's such a stressful time. You're moving house, you're moving country, you really want the visa, you really want to come here. I imagine everyone's feeling the same. You just want to get to Portugal, you're so excited. And if you don't do something right in the line, whether it be paperwork for the visa or something, that's at risk. So having experts that know what they're doing, it could be the difference between you getting here, essentially.
Yeah. Very good. Okay, well, let's turn to you as the expert on moving money around. And you've got some top 3 concerns, I think, stateside. And I imagine these are shared the world over, aren't they? But you have some case studies as well. So where do you want to begin tonight?
Well, I think really, I was thinking about this earlier. I'm really on a mission to talk more about money because, I go around to events, I listen to them talk about obviously getting visas, about maybe businesses doing business with another country, the cost of living or the cost of moving here. But really, what's missing is no one's talking about actually we've got euros here in Portugal, and majority of people, our customers, members, you don't have euros. You've got US dollars, you've got pounds, you've got Canadian dollars. So ultimately, you need to convert your money into euros. And that bit doesn't really seem to get talked about enough. It's really how much is it going to cost me? Do I need to pay a lawyer? I've got to buy my NIF, I've got a separate bank account. What's the cost of living here in Portugal? But actually, you converting your money, that can have such a big difference on this. It can have such a big difference on your budget, how much those euros cost you to buy them. And it really is an element that needs to be thought about in this process.
Yeah, really good. Thank you for that. And perhaps it's useful to have a quick update. I mean, these are volatile times, aren't they? And there was some UK. It wasn't a budget exactly. Was it called the spring forecast? There are the ongoing events in the United States, if I can refer to them as that for the time. Everyone knows what I'm talking about, but volatility coming from the US as well. What's the general picture with both sterling and dollars at the moment?
Well, I have got a graph that I can share. I don't know if I've got rights to share.
I will do my best to make you a co-host now, so that you can do that. Okay, so we're going to look at a graph, are we? Exciting.
Yeah, I just thought that might be easier just to make. Let's see if I can share.
You should be able to do that now. You should be able to share. How's that? Our image of you as somebody in the currency markets is being surrounded by monitors with various graphs.
The thing is, once you've had more than one monitor, you can't go back. So can you see that?
Yeah, definitely got it.
Yeah, excellent. So this is, I put this actually for the last 5 years. I'll say why in a minute, but yeah, we've seen a lot of volatility really this year. I mean, obviously we're talking about obviously US dollars, euros. When Trump came in, we saw a bit of US dollar strength because obviously, before, if we think about his previous term, it's all about, helping, essentially before helping the American economy, or that's kind of was always sort of his main focus and sort of obviously what he talked about when he was running for president. But then obviously we've seen a lot more things come out, talking about obviously ceasefires war, but mainly the tariffs and the trade war there. And that's where we've seen a lot of volatility. I mean, just to put it into monetary terms, really, I mean, we've seen a little bit of an improvement in the last sort of few days, but from the beginning of the month till sort of last week, we'd seen about a 4.5% movement, which on, if you're buying a house, I don't know, 250, 500,000 euros, that's a difference of 24,000 US dollars. So all of a sudden, just with a rate movement, those euros are suddenly a lot more expensive. And that's when I talk about the different elements of cost. What's the price of the exchange rate on the day? So a lot of people leave it to the last minute. What price are you going to give me against your bank, another provider? That is one element of cost. The other element of cost is what's happening with the exchange rate. The problem is, obviously, I talked about a little bit about the tariffs. The thing is, it's very unknown because obviously, he wants to impose the tariffs, but then you've got people how are other countries retaliating? And it's not just about putting tariffs on the way back. Like Canada, for example, will stop buying US goods. It's cutting off electricity to certain states. So it depends on how other countries retaliate to the tariffs. And then we've got to think about the knock-on effect of this will take a little bit of time, but it will trickle down, because obviously if Trump increased the tariffs, really the cost is then going to come on to the American people, because importing, that's where it's going to be more expensive. They're going to have to pass those costs on to the American people, and goods will become more expensive. And essentially, as I said, if people stop buying US goods, are more jobs at risk as well. So we may see, not right this second, but how that filters into the US economy, and we may see a slowdown there. But equally, obviously, if there's extra tariffs put on Europe, then there may be a little bit more of an economic slowdown there. So it's to what extent. So who's worse off in as far as that's how we look at sort of the currency. If one country's worse off, like the US, then we might see more US dollar weakness compared to how much weakness we see in the Eurozone. And if there are ceasefires, then we may see a slight improvement in the euro, especially with the Ukraine-Russian war, because energy might be a little bit cheaper to buy. So there's a lot going on really at the moment. And what we've historically, looked at to help forecast is data, sentiment, what people are going to come out and say. The problem is a lot of that's unknown, as we see, every day, looking at the newspaper or the news, something different comes out. And it's very difficult at the moment for the markets really to predict what's going to happen. And that's really the challenge. So I think what I'd normally say to people is that I'd say we're in for some very volatile times. And depending on your situation, are you looking to move money in the short term, or is this something 6 months, 12 months?
Yep.
We don't know what's going to happen with the rate. Let's just help you navigate that, whether it be just helping you watch the rate, keep you updated, whether it be a case of thinking, okay, maybe you need to start buying some euros in advance. Some clients do a quarter or half of what they need to do to try and spread that risk. There are other options and tools that we have, which we can get into a little bit later, but there are options. The other thing that we do is we look historic as well. And the reason we do that is because we look at actually, is it at good levels? Where has it been historically? Because sometimes that's perhaps an idea of actually, is the rate as bad as you think it is, because you're only looking in a short period of time. So if we look back sort of at the last 5 years, really, yes, we have been better, which we were at the beginning of the year, and we were in 2022. But as you can see from the graph, we don't stay there for very long, and we have actually rebounded to it's going to cost you more money. So again, that's the other thing about people we haven't got a crystal ball. We can't say for definite it's not going to go back to those levels. But as I said, when we look historically, it doesn't last there for very long. If you're waiting for it to improve back to the levels that we saw, as I said, at the beginning of the year or 2022, that might not happen in your time frame. It might not. So that's the sort of mentality that we're looking at, and actually how can we manage your payments in that time.
Okay,
and sorry, about sterling euro,
yes,
which that's obviously for me, and there's obviously other people in the room that are in the UK, we're around we're near sort of 119, 120. We've been sort of fluctuating 1% sort of either side of that for a while now, so it's not as volatile. And if you look back at the last 8 years, we've only hit 120 and just above about a handful of times. So for me, when I look at sort of sterling euro, if you can get close to anywhere between to 120, that's a very good rate if you look historically. So that's kind of what we're looking at. We're looking at sort of rates that are perhaps achievable, or what we see as a good rate, and I would benchmark it like that a little bit.
Okay, so with that little bit of analysis there, we can see that the pound seems to be strong against the euro. Volatility with the dollar and uncertainty. However, you do have strategies and ways to mitigate against that volatility that we'll talk about a little bit later on. But have you known a time when it's been as volatile as this since in your time in the currency industry?
Yes, I mean, recessions. I was sort of started really my job probably just before 2008. So I've seen it before, and things do come back. At that point, people are, people are not going to buy because the rate's really bad. But things come back. And also, it depends what your driver is with anything. People say, or, we've had discussions obviously about, NHR and all this sort of stuff. What's your driver? Why are you moving to Portugal? And if it's, a lifestyle choice, and certain other, obviously, the healthcare is more expensive in America, for example. Why are you moving? What's the driver? You're going to move anyway. So it's about speaking to the experts to try and see how can we make it, as cost effective as possible. And obviously, sometimes, if we're talking about the exchange rate, you might not have a choice. This is where the levels that we're at, and within the time frame that you're working to.
Yes.
If, for example, you need to make a payment this week, you're limited by what levels we're at the moment. That you have no choice because you need to make a payment this week. So all I'm trying to get people to think about is that if you think about it in advance, then there may be more options. It might end up being better for you to look at it in advance. It might not, but it just gives you a little bit more options and
Very good.
Again, it depends on your budgets, because I think we've seen it before where someone's budgeted to buy a house. I think it was Jerry that was telling me that someone's budgeted to buy a house and the exchange rate moved, and they were budgeting for a house and a car. The exchange rate moved, and then they couldn't buy the car. So that's sort of perhaps the way to look at the budgeting there a little bit as well.
It can be as significant as that. Okay. Diana agrees with you in the chat. Thanks for this comment, Diana. Sarah is so right about that. These were your opening comments, Sarah. One of the very first action items on your checklist for Portugal should be to open an account with Spartan FX. But the point being there is you can't understand why people don't talk about it sooner in the mix. You can understand why British people don't, because people, it seems culturally, they don't like to talk about money, the Brits. But it just seems general that people don't consider this early on in your experience.
Yeah, most people do leave it to the last minute, because I do understand that, even going through the process myself, one of the most important things is obviously the visa, because if I haven't got my visa, then I can't be here. So yeah. I understand the top of the list. That's the main focus. And then you sort of work back slightly from there. So when somebody says, right, you need to make this payment to your lawyer, or you need to make this payment for your rent, or you need to make this payment, then you're right, okay, right, I need to do that. So that's the sort of education piece, is just trying to get people to think about this in advance. But I understand why people do leave it to the last minute.
Yep. Human nature, I guess. We've got questions coming in. Thank you. It's a really good reason to be here live for the webinar. The Expats Portugal Premium members have some questions for you. We'll come back to those after we finished our first part of our conversation here. But thank you, Diana and Denise, for your questions. Key themes that emerge in the conversations you have with people seem to be the speed of transactions, security, and whether there's a better rate basically than people's banks, because that's an assumption as well, isn't it? I'll just use my bank. Can we break those down one by one? Let's start with speed, because you've mentioned it in terms of not leaving it too late. But when you're actually exchanging currency, how quickly can that work, and what can we tell people about that?
Yeah, absolutely. There's two elements. One, obviously, now that the rates change, people say, "Oh, you're right, Sarah. I wish I wasn't right," and they're sort of scrambling to sort of, "Oh, we must do this." And the other side of the speed is actually speed of transferring money. Now, again, leaving it to the last minute. So we've seen it with people who've left it to the last minute. They've used their bank, and the bank's taken about a week to transfer the money. Usually people come in and say, "Oh, I need my money there tomorrow." Again, we're working with, from a Spartan FX perspective, we send the money as quickly as possible. If the money's in our account, we can send it to the beneficiary really within 2 hours depending on obviously the bank cut-off times. But we're still working with antiquated systems. And as far as your bank in America, your bank in the UK, they still have slower processes. And then you've got the beneficiary bank, which is the Portuguese bank again, bureaucracy and paperwork and everything. So, we're trying to speed up the process, but obviously there's still elements that are out of our control, not out of your control, that we need to work with. So it's about understanding your deadlines and working back from that, because again, you just don't want to be stressed to know that you've got a deadline to make and you might not make that. And again,
you can practice with Spartan FX, can't you? So that will be a good use of the sending a small amount to test the process, right? And so that will take some of the mystery and stress out of the speed of transfer. Again, rather than leave it to the last minute, set up an account, do a small transfer and see how it works. And presumably doing a bigger transfer would follow the same pattern, because although you're agile and quick, as you said, you have to wait for some of the antiquated systems of the banking systems in either the United States or in the UK or in Portugal. But trying a little experimental transfer could take a lot of stress out of the situation.
Yeah, because there's different ways to send payments. So again, a lot of, certainly bank tellers in America have never seen an IBAN before. And usually clients call from their bank asking for help, or even we've spoken to bank tellers to tell them how to send them the money. So it's things like that that's a slight challenge if you're doing that on your own. And yet even sending a small test payment, it's not just for testing the process and the speed, but certainly what, behind the scenes, what we do as well is talk about security. So unfortunately, we do live in a world where there's more fraud and scams around, and emails can get intercepted. Human error. You get an email from a lawyer, they put an IBAN on the email and they've got a digit wrong. Now, if you were doing it yourself, or if you were doing it on an online system yourself, or if you went to your bank, as long as the IBAN is a valid IBAN, that money will go. And if you give authorization, then it can be quite difficult for you to get that money back if it's sent to the wrong account. So the things that we do is, one, perhaps send a small test payment, especially if you're sending large sums of money. You'd rather lose $100 or 100 euros rather than 100,000. And then also we ring the beneficiary and just check those bank account details as well.
Very good. Okay, excellent. Let's go to that assumption of I'll just use my bank. Why might people want to think twice about that?
The thing with the bank, there's a couple of things. One, as I said, the experience I've seen with customers, that some banks have, or your bank teller or different states haven't got experience with sending international payments. So that's the first thing. The other thing as well is the cost of what they're offering. They might say it's free to make a transfer. They might offer free transfer fees, but it is in the rate. So you're still going to be charged. They won't do it for free. It's in the exchange rate. And that's where you can see a real difference of what they're actually charging you. The other thing as well is that if you went into your bank and got a price from them now, that's not the rate you would get. You can't lock it in. It's actually when the money's sent. So if the money went later today, or it went tomorrow, or went on Monday because you've missed the bank, then that's when the exchange will happen. So if there's a rate movement in either direction, that you're going to be subject to that. So what could happen is, say it's all right if you go into your own account, but if you're sending to buy a property and you're sending to a seller's account, either the money could potentially be short or you're sending them slightly more money. So that's the challenge. And then that means if it is short, then you have to make another transfer. So again, it's just less hassle by knowing that you can look into the rate and then you know exactly how many euros can be sent. And the other thing that we do as well is that the way that we send the money, we do it so that because beneficiary banks can charge when they receive funds. So the way that we send the money, we send it so that we take on those charges so that the customer won't be charged. Whereas if you do it through your bank, depending on how they send it, which usually is a standard way, they won't take on those charges.
It doesn't seem to be their core business, and it also begs the question: why do people use their banks? Is it just like out of habit, and it's just kind of an old-fashioned thing and it's a residue of that?
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, I mean, historically, obviously, the banks obviously seen as secure, and also you've been with them for a long time, so there's sort of loyalty and trust. So again, I always think it's worthwhile checking because a number of people say, "Oh, I've been with a bank a long time," it doesn't necessarily mean that they're giving you a good deal. So it's always worthwhile checking. And that's the other thing that someone said to me the other day, how do you think AI is going to affect your job? Well, I don't know if it'll make me redundant specifically, but I don't think it'll make the dealers in the team redundant, because it's still a case of people need assistance with this. So they need the support and getting to know us, getting to know your dealer. They build up this sort of friendship. People say they're part of the Spartan FX family. I'm sure, if the team came over to Portugal, there's loads of beers waiting for
Oh
them.
yes, yeah,
Um, and it's about building again that relationship and that trust essentially. So that's what we're aiming to do here. But as I said, always worthwhile checking with your bank, because the systems and processes they have in place, they've been like that for many years. Similar
yeah.
with the Portuguese, and yes, it is improving, but it obviously will take time and not at the speed of how companies like ourselves can implement the new payment technology that's coming in.
Yeah, yeah, very good. Okay, you mentioned it briefly in passing there. The third of these key themes, security, and people do associate that obviously with their bank who they've used for years. Can you tell us more about security and how you approach that at Spartan FX? Actually, before you do answer that one, there's been a very important question that's come in that I should tackle now, or ask you to tackle. How do we open an account with Spartan? That's a very important question. Let's address that right away, Sarah, from Nancy there.
Absolutely. Well, our details are on the Expats Portugal directory, but we can put links and information in the chat. You can send an email, and we can get in touch with you.
I think Jerry will even assist here as well.
Yeah. I just want to jump in there, Sarah and Nancy, because Sarah, I think Nancy's waiting for a call from Steve.
Okay, perfect.
We'll
Okay.
take care of that.
Your email of the 18th of March.
Okay, let me.
I'll send you a copy. I'll resend it to you. Okay.
Okay,
Very
yeah.
good. That's
I was going to say I was going to put my email in the chat, but yeah, if you send that on, I'll check with Steve.
brilliant.
Okay. Thank you.
Been noted and dealt with there. Thanks, Nancy, for that. Always good to ask as well. Any questions you've got at all, just ask them. And sometimes you'll get a call from Spartan whilst they're at home in the evening as well, won't they? I can't guarantee that with Steve, but I'm sure Steve will be in touch with you very soon there, Nancy. Right, back to security then, Sarah.
Yes, so the other side of security, obviously, there are online providers specifically out there as well as banks and ourselves. And the benefit, obviously, of speaking to someone is that if there is any problems, you've got someone on hand that you can call, because some of them have a process of, we'll only get back to you in 5 working days. The other thing as well is that, yes, obviously, for maybe some very small amounts that some have a card that we don't have, but when you're talking about sort of larger sums of money, there is around sort of security. And the other side of it is about, how is my money protected?
Yeah.
So if anything should happen to us as a company, and the company that we use, we're backed by Visa, all of your money is protected. So the way that the accounts are set up, all of your money is protected. You get all that money back. It's not up to about the 85,000 that usually is. All of that money would be sent back before obviously the creditors or whoever would come in. So all of your money, and that's one thing obviously to bear in mind, and gives people a bit of peace of mind as well.
Very good. Excellent. Okay. Keep the questions coming in the chat, please, Expats Portugal members, and we'll get to those after we've concluded our conversation with Sarah here about moving currency or buying euros, basically. That's the bottom line, isn't it? Buying euros, whether it's in your native currency of dollars, pounds, or others, and we'll cover those as well before the night's out. You've got a scenario for us, which I think is a really great way of making this real, lifting it off the page, a kind of real life scenario to go through that will help people understand the process, I think.
Yes, because I talk obviously a lot about the money in the way that I have, but again, it's sort of I think that's the other reason people sort of forget about it, is because it's not maybe related to exactly what they're doing right now. And if you put it into a more real context, yes, I need that. That makes sense. So hopefully that will do that. So we had a customer who had already bought their euros in advance. Some, as I said, the reasons people do that, obviously it helps manage their budget. Some people do it because they are coming here on a scouting trip and they want to be ready. If they find a property, they're ready with a deposit to go. So again, everybody's different. They do it for various different reasons. Again, is it looking into a favourable rate? So they've got their euros already on account with us, which is free of charge to hold, because that's the other thing as well. With your bank in, say, the US or UK, if you haven't got a beneficiary bank, whether it be your own bank in Portugal or a lawyer or a seller's account, then you've got nowhere to put the euros. So you can't actually buy your euros in advance. There's no extra option. So we can hold them on account for you. So client's got euros on account. They've found their dream property and they're looking to send some money for the deposit and then obviously completion. So they instruct us that they're ready to make the transfer. Then we do extra compliance checks because now they're ready to buy a property. So we've got probably already on account is the proof of source of funds. And then we're looking for the proof of reason for the transaction, which is the property purchase. Now we collect all compliance documents then or in advance, because again, this is where payments can be held up, because when they're sort of larger sums or after you've done maybe a certain number of small amounts, there needs to be checks to make sure that obviously from an anti-money laundering perspective, because the beneficiary bank can flag the payment and request more information from the bank that sent the money. Now, if you are using your bank, your home bank, that's a conversation that will be going on between the two, which you can imagine happens at a very slow pace. So that's where it's quite useful that we're involved, because we get all the information that we need up front and then we send it on to the beneficiary bank. If there is anything extra that's required, again, we can liaise with you and then we can liaise with the bank, which often is a bit more of a streamlined process. So all compliance checks are done. We also find out what their dates are, so we make sure that we set up the payment date that is aligned with when they need to send the money. So again, it gets there in time. Then, as I said, before the money's sent, we do the security checks. So we ring the beneficiary and we just check that those details are correct before we send the payment, and then we're good to go and the money's gone. We do this very quickly, but obviously I'm just kind of breaking it down into obviously clear steps as to sort of what goes on in the background. But it is around, the compliance, the security checks, all that sort of stuff's happening in the background, and things that need to really consider as part of a process of sending money. Then the money's sent, and we have extra tracking on the payment. So it's called MT103 tracking. It's a official document for international transfers. Now, we then provide that to you. The benefit of that is that you know exactly where your money is. You've got this extra tracking. You've got this document that will help with that. It's up to you, but you can send that on then to your buyer's agent, your street real estate broker, or to the seller or their lawyer, and then it just gives them, peace of mind or they know that the money is on the way to them. And again, you can give it to your lawyer so they've got full audit trail of the money as well. So if there is any issues, we use that sort of tracking to check. And especially if you're sending to a seller, because that's the thing we see a bit more here. Usually it's to a lawyer, but in Portugal, I see more and more that we're sending it direct to sellers. So again, you know that money's then in their account in case they say it's not. So you've got that sort of
nice
there.
Yeah.
So it's all around sort of obviously getting the best rate that we can to make that cheaper for you, but also helping with the process. Because where we've seen issues is where, as I said, banks, if a client's used their bank, it's taken longer for the money to be sent. We've seen it with other online companies. The money's been held up for 2 weeks from a compliance perspective. We had a client that used another online provider and the beneficiary bank flagged the payment, but they were using intermediary banks. So it was very slow, the conversation between these three banks. or the provider at the end and the client just kept getting, we'll get back to you in 5 working days. So 5 working days, then they need to respond to them again. That's another 5 working days. So again, when you've got deadlines, this is where, it can get more stressful. So it's a case of, bearing that sort of in mind and making sure that, you've got the right processes in place to make the transfer.
Very good. Thank you for covering all of those. Are there any other points you are must covers before we go to some questions, individual questions?
Yeah, talking about options. So I've touched on the fact that you can buy euros, because that's probably what some people think. It's like, well, Sarah, I've not got a beneficiary, I've not got a bank account set up in Portugal, but you can still buy your euros because we can hold the money. The other thing that we can do as well, if especially for property purchases, or when you've sort of, you've kind of got a deadline, is that we can do what we call a forward contract. But all it is that we can fix the rate in advance. So if you come today and say, right, I'm buying a property, completion is in 6, 8, 12 weeks time, I can secure the rate today. We only need a 10% deposit. It's not a cost or a charge. You pay the remaining 90% when you need the money. We'll send it all out at that point, but it's on the rate that you've agreed today. So yes, if the rate moves in your favour, you are locked in. It's, as I said, it's more of a budgeting tool. So again, we speak to you and get to understand your situation. But the benefit of that is we don't need all the money, only 10%. So if you're selling a house in the US and the money's not come through, or if you've got money in higher interest earning account, you can keep it there. Or again, if it's in the high interest earning account, often it can take time to get that money released. So again, you don't have to wait and think, oh, well, I can't, my money's tied up there. It takes a few months to get it out. You can still be taking advantage of the rate as long as you've got the 10%.
Very good. And I think that takes care of a question that Diana asked for us. Can you please remind me a bit about whether it's possible to pre-program buy and sell orders for euros? The thing you might want to pick up on is how far in advance can we establish an order in our account?
Yeah, 12 months, so 1 year for that.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much for emphasizing that. And thanks for that question, Diana. Denise, our currency in South Africa is rubbish. In terms of exchange rates at the best of times, says Denise, personal opinion there, and probably getting worse as we have provoked. Oh, okay, yes, the ire of America. What would you advise? I have a Portuguese banking account, but interest rates on savings and investments accounts are really bad in Europe. That's true. I don't think anyone would doubt or question that. Should I start transferring funds now, but wait for good conversion rates, or keep it here and earning a good interest rate? It's difficult to calculate swings and slides to see if I'm better off earning good interest rates here or transfer and take a large loss with no good investment opportunities. Now, Sarah did say she didn't have a crystal ball, and we should re-emphasize that. And you're not a financial advisor either, are you, Sarah? But can you put some light on this in terms of experience of other people and what you've observed?
I think it depends on well, a couple of things. Obviously, speak to a financial advisor and find out what's the best options of obviously where your money should be to earn obviously good interest. And, is that here, is it there? That's a different conversation, obviously. And it depends on what you're looking to do here. So, if you've got plans to buy a property, because some will rent and then maybe in 12 months buy. So what's your time frame? If you're looking to buy a property in the next 12 months, then that's a conversation of you will need your money here. So actually then it's more important to let's look at the exchange rate, and with the swings in the exchange rate, have keep it in the higher interest rate account is good, but as you said, you may actually, I don't know, have no gains because of the exchange rate movement. So I think it's having that conversation with your dealer to think, right, okay, well, when are we going to exchange this? Because I do need money here. If you've got savings and you have no need to send it here in the next 5 years, then that's a completely different story.
Yes.
What's happening in 5 years' time, that could be completely different. Depends on how much you're earning in the high interest rate earning account, I would say.
Yeah, so some number crunching to do, perhaps with your financial advisor as well as your dealer. And by that, you mean the nominated person at Spartan FX, have that
Yes,
conversation.
yes.
And you said earlier on, actually, the getting to know you conversation. Some people, because we make a lot of assumptions here about what people might know that or we can do, Sarah, and it's great that you break it down in the way that you do here. But people might think, well, the only time I would speak to Spartan FX is when I want to change some money. You will speak to people about allaying their fears and talking strategy. It's not just about having to ring up and do a deal, is it?
No, no, speak to us in advance. And also, it's not just about the rate. Speak to us when you're, if you've already moved, not a problem. Still, obviously, still speak to us. But if you haven't moved, please speak to us before you move, because again, going back to transferring your money, that's where people find it often a bit of a struggle. They move here, and especially if you want to do maybe larger sums, your bank then suddenly, okay, now we need more authorization, which is understandable. You need to sign this form. You need an international card reader, which I think is just a little machine. You put your card in, it isn't a PIN number. So extra authorization. How do you get that? You get it in branch. It's things like that where clients have found that it's been a bit more of a struggle, or they've had to fly back. Other clients, they've found that which they didn't realize, because again, if you're doing it, very small, sort of small amounts, it's not been a problem. Now the client's got a limit on how much they can transfer every 30 days. It's $70,000 US. Again, these sort of things you don't find them out until you need to move the money. So again, that's about preparation and speaking to your bank and understanding who you bank with. Do they make an international payment? What's their process? What do you need to do for authorization? It's these sort of things to sort of prepare for, so that, again, leaving it to the last minute and you're here can be a bit more tricky. It's not impossible. There's still things that can be done anyway, but again, it just makes it more difficult if you've not maybe done that preparation before you leave.
Very good. So don't be afraid to have the conversation with Spartan. Find them in the business directory of Expats Portugal. And sorry, Denise, we can't be more specific about that, and agree with you about the interest rates in Europe there. And yes, we can't give you financial advice. But did you notice there, Sarah has been in Portugal for nearly 11 months now, and she did say it depends. You are becoming quite Portuguese already there, Sarah, I think, fair to say. Right. Whenever
It's maybe it's a case of, could you have the conversation in conjunction, your financial advisor with your dealer? There's no way, obviously with your permission, we could do that. That's not a problem. Again, I always say to people, we're not a standalone. We can work with, obviously with your permission, obviously GDPR, we can work with other people. So especially, obviously the scenario I said, we often work very closely with you and your lawyer, or your lawyer and your buyer's agent, or your real estate agent. We sort of work as a team and can be in communication all together to help with the transfer for the property. No different with other elements if need be.
This is amazing. This is a very much an Expats Portugal scenario, isn't it? Because this is what's happening now with Pedro from EI, who is doing three-way calls with your native financial advisor, accountant.
Yes.
His insight from the Portuguese side and the client. So a similar scenario with Spartan FX potentially.
Yeah, potentially.
Very good. Very, very good. Okay. Thank you very much, Diana, for this comment. The aim is to minimize transactional friction, faster, easier, less expensive money management. And I think you've got all of those with Spartan. We answered your question, Nancy, about opening an account. I've got to be careful because whenever a pet appears in the conference call here, people start talking about the pets, and I have to find my questions hidden among the pet talk in the chat. Keep it going. There's some lovely conversations going on. People meeting up as well. It's lovely to see that as well. Laronda always found it odd that people are so reluctant to talk about money and handle money issues when money literally dictates what we are and aren't able to do. It's almost like an afterthought for a lot of people. We're certainly trying to put that right tonight with that. And you had a question, Debbie, about minimum amounts. Yeah, I transfer a pretty small amount monthly using Wise currently, just to cover rent and utilities. What's Spartan's minimum that you would transfer?
There's no minimum. Yeah, there is no minimum. We can do any amounts. I think it depends, obviously, how much you're transferring, how often you're doing it. It's all kind of relevant. If you're doing sort of a one-off, or it's very small and it's only on odd occasions, then perhaps what you're doing is it works for you. What I would do is have a conversation with us, and what we can do is just compare. And if we think that what you're doing works and it's good, then you can stick with what you're doing. Because the key thing for me is that somebody is getting a good rate and it's working for them, and we'll be very honest with that. But if we think we can do better for you, then we will. And as I said, I think sort of, depending on what you're doing, maybe larger sums or more regular, then we can maybe make the process easier for you.
Worth having a chat then, Debbie, with Spartan. Okay, I think what we'll do is, so that the recording is not too long, I'm not ignoring the questions that are there. We'll come to those in the after party with Sarah after we've concluded the recording. But anything else you want to reiterate before we pause the recording tonight, Sarah?
I think we've probably touched on everything. I mean, the key, as I said, the takeaway is obviously, everyone seems to the questions understand it here, and it's getting that message out that think about it in advance, because you could save more money, less stress ultimately at the end of the day. I mean, there's so much going on with, I know myself, moving country. I use Steve, I call him up and he does it all for me. And it's great because it's just one less thing for me to worry about. And as we said, it isn't just sometimes about the rate. It is about the process, and there is more compliance. And again, someone asked me a little bit about the sort of, future of payments and things like that. The challenge still is compliance and the regulatory restrictions and requirements that everybody has to go through, and also in the different countries. And often that's not moving. The advancements there aren't as quick as technology. I mean, we're still implementing, obviously advanced payment technology. I mean, we've touched on the sort of tracking and things like that we do, and the speeds that we can transfer money. But there is still a lot of compliance and regulatory requirements that are involved in transferring money that we have to adhere to. And that's where we see the most issues of money being held up. And, even sort of, small amounts, really after a certain amount is done, compliance checks need to be done, because again, they could be, I know you're not doing it, but from a company perspective, what people should be checking is large sums of money, anything over about £10,000 equivalent, but also, after so many transactions needs to be checked, or the spot checks need to be done. So again, you just don't want to find that, everything's going on fine, and then you've got a deadline and there's a hold up in compliance for your payment. That's where more stress happens.
Right. Well, thank you for the heads up on that and everything else you've shared with us tonight. It's quite straightforward in a way, it would appear, and it's fascinating how our webinars become quite not complicated, but as soon as people check their assumptions and you give them a few pointers on things, the conversation develops, doesn't it? And we go into some nuance and personal situations. So thank you for that again this evening, Sarah. Find Spartan FX in the Expats Portugal business directory. One of the great benefits of being a member is that you get to hang around and talk to the experts one-to-one in an informal setting after the recording, which is exactly what we're going to do now. Join us by becoming a member at expatsportugal.com. Thanks very much for the time being, and thanks for all your help behind the scenes. La Ronda, Diana, lots of great conversation and mutual help going on between our wonderful community here this evening as well. Thanks, Sarah.